Every brewing game or game with brewing I've seen has a fundamental problem. Either the brewing is lacking or the effects are lacking. Sometimes both. This does not make the games bad, of course, simply they are not made to appease my dream, which is a game where the brewing is in-depth and mechanically rewarding. The games currently around fall into two camps. Brewing games with in-depth brewing systems. Like potion craft, you get to choose ingredients and engage in a brewing system which is more than just putting the right items into slots. The problem is, in these games you don't actually make potions. You make an arbitrary product with a price and quality. They may have a sprite and a little flavor text, but you don't get to use them. Mechanically, there's no connection of the potion to its claimed effects. It could just as easily be a cooking game. The point of the potions are the effects. It doesn't matter that Potion Craft has dozens of potions if you can only use 2 of them as fertilizer. Again, that doesn't make these games bad. It's just they use potion making as an aesthetic wrapper for a shopkeeping game. I want a game that makes me feel like an alchemist. That brings us into our second camp. Action games with brewing systems. Games like Minecraft or Terraria have sizable brewing systems, but that's far from the central mechanic. Because brewing is a supplement to gameplay instead of the focus, the actual brewing is not mechanically deep and the effects are not inventive. There is no player's skill or knowledge that goes into making a potion. Potions are fixed recipes. And that makes sense. Potions are not the focus, so they need to be accessible, otherwise players might skip them. Even if they still do. These games add depth by creating some interest in the resource collection, but are not aiming to make brewing systems a core part of progression. Instead, it's a supplement to power scaling or side content. There is a very long list of games I've never played, obviously. Among them, I'm sure there are true gems in the potion making genre, but from what I know, I'm about to make the best of both worlds, in my opinion. That is a large undertaking, but we can split it into a few parts: the ingredients, the brewing, the potions, and the effects. All of these require lots of development and spriting, but today we can build out the data side, how these all interact in order to lay out the rules and foundations to build an engaging system. I'm going to measure the quality of the system based off of these principles: progression, logic, interaction, and strategy. Progression is what makes the system fun over the course of the game. Players want bigger and better things, progress towards some end. Action games with brewing mechanics fall short in this. When you reach a certain point, or a few points, you can all of a sudden make a whole bunch of different kinds of potions all at once, and then you steadily progress past the point of them being exciting if they ever were. If I want this system to carry the game, we need to steadily advance. As I get further into development, I'd like to stop this progression from being too straightforward, but we can think about some non-linear progression later on. Logic is the game following its own rules. If done right, the player feels empowered by thinking and feels seen when the game responds to them. Interaction and strategy go hand in hand. I want the potion effects and ingredients to play with each other. If each recipe and its effect are its own set things, we never get a chance to make a choice. Being able to fail or make something less potent or efficient by mixing the wrong things makes it all the better to find a combo that's optimal for you. That's what makes some deck builders and roguelikes so captivating, is finding a new combination that feels like it's breaking free of the game design, thanks to you. If I can successfully make a system that supports these characteristics, whatever comes after is in good hands. How many views do you need to feel like you exist?
Huh?
How many views do you need to feel like you exist?
Like 100?
You're lying.
Well, more, I guess.
Subscribe. Okay, so here's what I got. I'm going to explain this in an object-oriented way, defining each keyword from top to bottom. Starting from the top, we have items, which could be tools, building materials, equipment, and so on, but for now it just consists of ingredients. Ingredients have freshness, quality, a list of attributes, transformations, and traits. Quality affects the maximum intensity of an effect you can get out of an ingredient. Freshness is how long the ingredient will last. Quality is a tool for progression and can add some interest into resource gathering. Players can progress by getting higher quality ingredients, and having the equivalent of rare and legendary resource drops interrupts the monotony of harvesting. but I'll keep the RNG influenceable so it doesn't become a point of frustration or a time waster when you can't get the quality you need for a particular recipe. For freshness, while I also feel like I don't like timers in games, having a deadline for optimal ingredient use will hopefully prevent players from being hoarders and encourage the use of ingredients in whatever potion they can put together in order to not waste it. This will need some playtesting, but it should push players to think about what ingredients they need and give them a meaningful reason to return to certain resource locations instead of just grinding out the collection all at once. For example, the timers in Cultist Simulator make the game reward planning and opportunistic actions. Like, I didn't plan to summon this fire demon who can teach me an ancient language and open doors, but since I have this aspect that's gonna wear off in 1 minute anyway. Transformations are a set of items that the ingredient can transform into and under what conditions. For example, an apple can turn into a rotten apple if it has no freshness left. I don't really have a gameplay idea for this yet, but it's unobtrusive for now and could have huge potential later on. Attributes hold an effect, concentration, and tier. Traits are tags to identify an object and can sometimes have gameplay effects, like a daisy could be tagged flower. Both attributes and traits can be suppressed or released by physicals. For example, a flower could reveal the trait dried if subject to heat, which could increase the concentration. Effects can be a status, reaction, or catalyst. Status is a potion effect like speed. Reactions create a physical effect like a bomb making an explosion, and catalysts amplify or change an effect, possibly under condition, like a magic rose, which is a multiplier to all speed effects. Physicals, I'm still working on a name for this. If you have any suggestions, let me know. Physicals, I'm thinking for now, is corrosion, combustion, and concussion. These effects would also have tiers. Like a low-level corrosion could be like pickling, but a high-level corrosion would be like hydrofluoric acid that could dissolve metal and glass. Combustion would be fire and heat effects, and concussion would be things like impact and crushing. Did I choose these three for the alliteration? I see a certainly confounding and careless conclusion concocted correctly. So in practice, we could use different processes, heat, acid, and crushing on an ingredient in order to bring out the good traits and attributes and suppress the bad ones. The puzzle comes in trying to do them all at the same time. Finally, we have brewing stations. This will be an easy way of bringing in progression, as the stations will all be a balance of cost, efficiency, and physical type. So if your ingredient loses its attribute from the heat, you would not be able to access the effect until you unlock a non-heat based brewing method. Alright, I'm glad you're still with me. Let's see how well this stacks up against my criteria. Progression-wise, the tiers, physical effects, and brewing stations can all be gates from using a certain ingredient in special ways. We can also introduce new ingredients over time as well. The system should support having some things in sight but out of reach at any given point in the game to guide the player along the progression. Having some pre-made recipes would also support that, so the player can self-motivate to reach the level at which they can utilize these recipes. Logic. While there is some systemic support for logic in this framework I set up, it really matters how I end up using the traits and attributes, and if I do that consistently. I'll have to revisit this metric once I make a dozen or so items and interactions. But on a literal level, as long as the code isn't buggy, the tags will always work how they say. Interaction. This is actually the reason I added catalysts and traits. I knew I wanted concentrations of different effects, but I wasn't sure how to make synergies. But I took a page out of deck builders like Slice and Dice, which is a dice builder but regardless, and how many interactions you can have if you use keywords. This also depends on what items and traits I create, but I think I can make anything that comes to mind pretty flexibly in this system. Strategy. I think this is more of a symptom of how many items and how diverse they are and at what points they're accessible. But imagining I make a good number of items, this system definitely supports player choice and strategy. Okay, let's see how this works in Engine. So here's how it looks in Engine. You can see we have the base item class, which just has a name and sprite. I'll probably need to add some more things in there later, like subtext and whatnot. And then we also have the ingredient class, which has the attributes, traits, freshness, length, and transformations. As you can see, the attributes and traits have these things called doors, which is just a container for an attribute, and then a few ways it can be turned on and off. For example, we can have a quality that this attribute starts showing up, So maybe only high level flowers would give you a speed 2 effect. And we can also have a quality where it turns off, where a low level flower may give you a little bit of poison. We can also add keys to turn the attribute on and off. For example, I can add a physical effect. So I could say you need combustion level 2 to turn on this attribute. And it's the same thing for the traits, where these traits can also be turned on or off given a specific quality. The reason I'm doing it in this nested and somewhat convoluted way is so that the individual components will be more adaptable. So that way I can build out the resource and give it all the code that speed actually does, and then I can reuse it for later ingredients. So I'm using these Godot resources to a bit of an extreme. On the plus side, I have all of these built-in editor features, and I can easily modify and save out these resources. So that could make it so that I can have some non-code additions. And as well, I know it's kind of silly to think about it so early out, but if I wanted to add modding support, it's pretty easy to just drag and drop these resources. On the negative, because these are more complicated than the alternative, which would be a JSON file in plain text, it'd be a lot harder to change a lot of resources at once in bulk. I found myself a bit stunlocked because I don't know if I've fully added all of the features and support that I need, and I know once I start adding items, I'll find some new ones, but I don't want to start adding items until it's done so I don't have to go back and change a bunch of items. That's one thing that I'm just going to have to get over it. I know remaking a bunch of items is kind of tedious, but that will make the project better and give me a chance to explore some new options. So if I embrace the fact that I will have to remake it, I can just go full steam ahead and start making a bunch of items to see how it all works out. I know it's not best practice performance-wise to have all of these nested classes and resources, but because each item is only referencing it once, it should be alright. So what's next for me is making the combat system, then experimenting with how statuses can affect the player. Once I have the actual status, I can see what this more conceptual data side is missing, and then try to build out some basic alchemy puzzles to start prototyping the brewing system. Thank you for watching. If you have any other suggestions, let me know. Okay. Goodbye.